I wanted to talk about the series on Netflix called Shiny Happy People because I made the mistake of watching both seasons of that show in one setting. And I have to admit, it was a little bit triggering. And for me, especially the stuff about dating and relationships and purity culture. So if you haven't seen it, season one is sort of about the Duggar family, like it centers on the Duggars, but then there's a whole bunch of uh, other things about church culture at the time that the Duggars were becoming popular that they get into. And then season two is about a conference called Teen Mania and about like millennials who attended Teen Mania and the different things that happened in the services and what ultimately led to the downfall of the organization behind those conferences. And, in watching what the Duggar girls went through, becoming victims of sexual assault to their own brother, and then watching season two, there's one woman particularly who went to the Teen Mania conferences. She was a worship leader, and she talks about at one point being kicked out of one of the programs there because of the fact that she had the audacity to kiss a boy and about the way that she was treated in the aftermath of that. It made me think a lot about purity culture, the things that I went through growing up, and why I believe that a lot of purity culture is harmful to women, especially women who are looking for a happy and healthy relationship, a happy and healthy marriage. You know, I related so hard to the woman who got kicked out for kissing a boy thing. I remember when I was in high school, there was a situation where a boy from another church kissed me, and the reaction to it was I was expected to go to that church and apologize for the fact that obviously I had done something wrong in that situation. Obviously, I was too tempting, and it couldn't possibly be his fault. Luckily, my mom did not allow that to happen, but stories like that, experiences like that, it's one of the reasons why I'm in business to begin with. So many women come to me because they either are currently Christian or they grew up Christian and they've left, but they're still dealing with the after effects of a lot of things that were taught that were not healthy. And I want to be clear before I get into the reasons why I think purity culture is harmful, right? I do believe that the Bible is full of practical instructions for living. I am still a Christian, right? And a lot of the things that we hear about sex and sexual discipline and waiting to have sex, I think that there's a lot of practicality behind that. Sex is not just a physical act, it is an emotional act too. It is a hormonal act that interferes with how we think and see other people. And there's a lot to be said for having discipline in general, and also particularly having sexual discipline and being very intentional about who it is that you choose to partner with and who you choose to have these deep, intimate experiences with. That being said, again, I'm going to go through a few of the reasons why I believe that purity culture has done a complete disservice to a lot of women and what we can do to attract, again, better, healthier relationships. So you'll see me looking down because I have notes. But one is this whole myth that love is earned through purity, or, on the other hand, that love is taken from us or that we don't deserve love because of a past mistake or two, right? So a lot of women are taught that if they want the prize of getting a husband, of being married, that the way to do that is by being pure and by maintaining their virginity so that they can have a blessed and happy marriage. And it sets up this whole idea of having to stay pure in order to get a reward. And it ignores the fact that there are a lot of complex things that go into relationships. It ignores the fact that relationships are mutual and that things have to be done on both sides. And this is one of the things that honestly really pisses me off, particularly as it pertains to women, because there's so much emphasis on women being pure and maintaining their virginity. And it's kind of seen as like, yeah, that's a nice thing for boys, but no one actually expects boys to maintain their purity. Or if they don't maintain their purity, it is because some Jezebel woman tempted them and they couldn't help it, right? And of course, on the flip side of that, there's this whole idea that if a woman does not wait until marriage, then she has ruined her life forever, that now she is damaged goods and that she is tainted. You cannot earn love through whether or not you maintain abstinence, which even in that is a whole nother can of worms itself. Because let's be real, I know so many young women who technically maintained their virginity up until marriage, but they did a whole lot of other things, right? And then it becomes a matter of, okay, so what is pure and what is not pure? Where's the line crossed? But yes, it also ties our worthiness and our validation to whether or not we're able to maintain a certain level of sexual discipline. And that counters even what we know in the Bible, right? Like, I know that regardless, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I also know that God is a forgiving God. And while, yes, as I said a few minutes ago, I truly believe that there's a lot to be said for sexual discipline. I truly believe that abstaining can do wonders for your confidence, and it is great for your mental health because it just spares you a lot of heartache that other people who don't have the same level of discipline have gone through. There are benefits to it, but it does not mean that you are doomed because you didn't wait. And it also doesn't mean that you are automatically blessed because you did wait. And I know people who did not wait until they were married. And other than that, they are great people, loving people, caring, truly Christian people. And I know people who did wait until they were married, and they're evil in a lot of other ways, right? So that is not the only end all be all factor. The other issue is that purity culture causes this suppression of natural desire and natural intimacy. Because one of the problems with purity culture is that we don't talk about the fact that there are other forms of intimacy outside of sex. There's emotional intimacy, there's conversational intimacy. And when we demonize intimacy so hard, we don't talk about these other forms. And we deny young people, but young women especially, from understanding all of the different things that go into having a vulnerable, trusting, healthy relationship. It also causes women to completely suppress their sexual desire, which leads to difficulty in emotionally connecting to a person, not just difficulty in physically connecting to a person. And it keeps us from having a healthy exploration of what attraction looks like and what dating looks like before commitment. The fact is that most of us are not going to marry our first boyfriend or our first girlfriend. And by not talking about what attraction looks like, by not talking about what courtship and dating look like, we set people up for relationships that are going to fail. We set people up to have really unhealthy experiences. The other issue with purity culture is it creates these fear-based relationship standards. So instead of learning about discernment, instead of learning about compatibility, women are taught based on women are taught to choose partners based on whether or not there's a shared goal of being pure, right? Women are taught to only choose a partner based on whether or not the two of you are oftentimes not just the same religion, but the same denomination, a church that believes in the exact same things that your church believes in, even if you don't always share those same beliefs yourself. There's so much more to compatibility than whether or not the two of you know the same Bible verses. Although I think that that is important. If your faith is important to you, then you should be with someone who has the same faith. But that is not the only thing that matters. And also, this is something I work with clients all the time. I will ask them, what is it that you want in a partner? And one of the first things out of their mouths is often, I want someone who's Christian. Okay, Christianity is a spectrum, right? And I see oftentimes that, I'm dealing with clients who don't even take the time to really stop and think about that. Does that mean same denomination as you, right? Does that mean, okay, you can both be Christian, but one of you could go to church every Sunday and the other person could be a CME, right? Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter. They only go to church 2 or 3 times a year. You could both attend services every Sunday, but one of you could attend them in person and the other person only does virtual services and doesn't feel the need to have like a real church home, right? There's such a huge spectrum that you really want to understand your feelings about this before you truly try to enter into a relationship. And not only that, by basing your relationships just on this fear of it has to be someone who has the exact same belief system as you, it leads to people staying in relationships that aren't compatible with them, that aren't aligned with the other things in their life, like their values on career, for example, or education, things like that. You'll stay in those relationships because of guilt, because you're afraid of sinning if you leave that relationship and try to enter another, or because you feel this pressure to redeem someone, right? I see this all the time with women. They enter into a relationship with someone whose faith is not on the same level as theirs, but then they end up having sex or they end up staying in the relationship for a certain period of time. And now they feel like they have to stay in the relationship with the person and they have to convert them over to the same level of belief in order to make everything right and healthy and holy. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The other problem that I have with purity culture is that it leads to your identity being tied to your sexual history. And this goes a little bit, I brought this up in my first point, the idea that you are damaged goods if you had sex before marriage, or the idea that you are great and a saint and, you are the best ever because you did manage to wait for a little while. And allowing that holier than thou attitude or allowing that shame to really get deep inside of you, that can lead to you sabotaging potentially great romantic relationships. It can also lead to insecurity. And it can also lead to a lot of guilt for no reason. Season 2 of Shiny Happy People, there was talk about the whole idea that as even children admitting that we are sinners and that there's something wrong with us, and having 11 and 12-year-olds, fall upon the altar because they're sinful and not even understanding necessarily what they've done so wrong that's sinful, but feeling like they have to confess to something. And I see this even in women who have waited until marriage to have sex because their identity is so tied into their purity. Anything can allow them to have these feelings of insecurity that aren't warranted. Feeling like, for example, they don't deserve to be married because they kissed someone 5 years ago, right? So making your whole identity about your sexual history just leads to all sorts of unhealthy relationship patterns. The other thing is that it causes women to be incredibly passive in pursuing a relationship. Here's the thing. As women, we have both masculine and feminine energy. There's all this talk about feminine energy and always being feminine and waiting to be pursued and all of that. And yes, I think it is great to expect a man to pursue you or to desire for a man to pursue you in a relationship. At the same time, that doesn't mean that you have no active roles in the dating process, even if you allow yourself to be the one who is pursued and chased. Even if that is the case, you still play an active role in voicing your expectations, voicing your standards, having boundaries, expressing those boundaries, upholding those boundaries. And when you allow purity culture to completely control what you think and feel about dating, you end up in situations where you don't get to choose a partner. Someone is someone chooses you and you feel like you have to stick with it, whether or not this person is compatible with you or aligned with you, because you don't know how to communicate boundaries. You don't know how to say, this doesn't work for me. You don't know how to leave when it is clear that a situation is unaligned. The This is either the fifth or sixth. I should have numbered these. I'm sorry. The fifth or sixth problem with purity culture is that you end up not having a framework for what healthy sexuality looks like after you get married. This is something I can talk about from personal experience, getting married, being in a marriage, and you hear that saying that, like, oh, the marriage bed is not defiled or whatever, but still having feelings of guilt about having sex because there are so many years that you were spent being taught that sex is dirty and sex is a sin. So, yeah, people can say, oh, it's fine after marriage, but when you only hear sex in terms of this is a dirty, bad thing for 20, 30, 40 years of your life, whatever age it is that you get married, and then you get married, it is hard to undo that type of programming. And that is exactly what it is. It is religious programming, not religion itself, not a relationship with God. It is religious programming, is what it is. And by having this constant message of sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, what do you expect when someone gets into a marriage and all of a sudden you're supposed to change 20, 30 years of that? Like, it's ridiculous to think that someone can just flip a switch and everything is going to be good. And that leads to confusion. It leads to pain. It leads to still having shame, even when you are in a loving partnership. And if marriage is so beautiful and marriage is blessed by God, then I think it follows that God would not want us to have those feelings. And that is important that even in churches, we talk about what healthy sex looks like. The Again, this is six or seven. I'm sorry that I did not write down the numbers. Um, Purity culture causes us to avoid vulnerability and intimacy. Again, I brought up the fact that there are multiple types of intimacy outside of sexual intimacy. There's, emotional, there's conversational, there's spiritual intimacy. And by making intimacy a bad thing, we don't talk about intimacy at all. So we don't know, oftentimes, we don't understand what it's like to have an intimate connection with someone outside of sex. And there's demonizing anything that has even the appearance of being bad. And because of that, oftentimes, even in the dating or courtship process, there's a hesitancy to allow yourself to be too intimate with a partner, again, emotionally or conversationally intimate, because you don't want it to look like, you don't want there to be an appearance of maybe you're so close because there's physical intimacy. And because of that, women often don't understand what it looks like to form a deep bond with another person, especially not another person of the opposite sex. And then back to my previous point, that makes it hard when you get married to form these bonds even after marriage because you have absolutely no practice or reference for that from before you were married. I also want to point out that this impacts men too. My audience is mostly women, and yes, I give advice catered towards women, but purity culture is harmful for men because men who are raised in purity culture have these unrealistic expectations about how a woman is supposed to behave or what a woman's worth is judged on. And that also leads to unhealthy relationship dynamics. And there's this mixed messaging of women being pure and men, the whole wink, wink, nod, nod, boys will be boys attitude that leads to certain things about like men saying unhealthy things about women who have, say, a high body count, which has never made sense to me because if a man gets credit for having had a high body count or having slept with a lot of women, how is he getting those numbers? How is he getting that high body count unless there are women who are willing to sleep with him? Unless, he's sleeping with other men, which is a whole nother story in itself, right? But this mixed messaging is not healthy for women and it's not healthy for men either. So instead of purity culture, the way most millennials were raised in it, the way that you see it explained on Shiny Happy People, we need to have better conversations about sex as Christians, as people of faith. I not only I grew up Pentecostal. I grew up with a dad who's a preacher, but I studied religion in college. It's one of the things that I study. And, I see this even working with other women of faith, working with Jewish women, working with Muslim, Hindu women. It's across the board. Attitudes towards sex are oftentimes very unhealthy. And no matter what your faith background is, we need to start having healthier conversations about it. We also need to start teaching, particularly women, what it looks like to set boundaries, to have standards, to understand what compatibility is, and to also have discernment that goes beyond thinking that someone is automatically a good person because he didn't try to sleep with you on the first date. Like, yes, that is also a great thing. And body autonomy and body autonomy is important. And a man who respects consent is incredibly important. But it takes more than that to make a man a good man. And understanding that, those are the types of conversations that we need to be having within church and other faith settings, right? So it is important that we teach women to understand standards and boundaries and to set those. It's important that we teach about emotional intelligence, that we teach about consent, that we teach about self-respect and what also mutual respect looks like between partners in a relationship, even when you're dating, even long before you get to the marriage part. And it's important that we affirm healthy sexuality. There are parts of the Bible that talk about sex and sexuality. Read Song of Solomon, right? And that is just as important part of our spiritual walk as all the other things about, the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount and all these other things. We need to teach about healthy sexuality as well. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you were taught and if you grew up in church, if you grew up Christian like me, if you grew up conservative Christian like me, but also if you grew up of any other faith, let me know what you were taught about sex. Let me know about how that impacts you as an adult. And also what you think we need to be teaching younger generations now so that they don't grow up with the complexes and issues that some of us have had to spend years dealing with. And also, if you are a single woman navigating these things, you're trying to date, you're trying to find a healthy, loving partnership, while also maintaining your faith and your values, and you're looking for help with that, um, I would love to be that woman to help you. You can schedule a call with me and we can talk about my coaching program and what that looks like. I will put a link in the description so that you can do that. And I will talk to you soon. I love you so much. Bye.